You've been lied to about democracy your entire life. Not by some shadowy conspiracy, but by well-meaning teachers, politicians, and history books that conveniently left out one disturbing detail. The man universally considered one of the wisest humans who ever lived thought democracy was a terrible idea. Socrates, yes, that's Socrates, watched democracy firsthand in ancient Athens and concluded it was barely better than mob rule. And before you dismiss this as ancient history, consider this. Every single problem he identified is happening right now, in your country, probably in your last election. What if I told you that democracy killed the greatest philosopher who ever lived? Not metaphorically, literally. They voted, they counted the ballots, and they democratically decided to execute him for the crime of asking questions. Today, you're going to discover why Socrates believed letting everyone vote was like letting passengers steer a ship during a storm, why he thought democracy rewards the best liars instead of the best leaders, and why his warnings about mob mentality are more relevant now than ever. This isn't about being anti-democratic or pushing some agenda. It's about understanding the philosophical wisdom that's been buried because it's too uncomfortable to discuss. If you value truth over comfort, if you're tired of pretending our system is perfect when you can see it breaking, then stick around. And hey, if this video makes you think differently about that next ballot you cast, hit that like button and subscribe. Because someone needs to ask the uncomfortable questions, and apparently that's still a dangerous job.
The shocking truth: democracy's greatest critic was its first witness.
Picture this. You're walking through ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy, and you stumble upon a crowd gathered around an old man asking uncomfortable questions. That's Socrates, and he's about to drop a truth bomb that'll shake your modern assumptions to their core. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Socrates wasn't some distant observer critiquing democracy from an ivory tower. This man lived, breathed, and ultimately died in the world's first democratic experiment. He watched ordinary citizens make decisions about war, peace, and justice every single day. And what he saw terrified him more than any tyrant ever could. You know what's ironic? We've been taught to worship both Socrates and democracy as pinnacles of Western civilization. But here's where it gets interesting. These two icons were actually bitter enemies. Socrates looked at Athenian democracy the way a master chef watches customers pour ketchup on a perfectly cooked steak. He saw potential being wasted, wisdom ignored, and crucial decisions being made by people who had no business making them. Think about it. In ancient Athens, any citizen could vote on military strategy, economic policy, or legal verdicts. No expertise required, no knowledge test, just show up and cast your vote. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The philosophical wisdom of Socrates led him to a disturbing conclusion. Giving everyone equal say in governance was like giving everyone equal say in performing surgery. Sure, it sounds fair and inclusive, but would you want your appendix removed by popular vote? This wasn't just theoretical criticism from a grumpy philosopher. Socrates witnessed firsthand how democratic Athens made catastrophic decisions, launching disastrous military campaigns, executing successful generals out of spite, and swaying with every emotional wind that blew through the agora. He saw how easily the mob could be manipulated, how quickly wisdom was drowned out by the loudest voices. What really got under Socrates' skin was the assumption that all opinions were equal. In his eyes, democracy created an illusion that the uninformed citizen's vote carried the same weight as someone who'd spent years studying statecraft and philosophy. This wasn't elitism. It was recognition of a fundamental flaw. When critical thinking takes a back seat to popular opinion, when expertise is treated with suspicion rather than respect, you don't get government by the people. You get government by whoever can manipulate the people best. And speaking of manipulation, wait until you hear Socrates' brilliant ship analogy that exposed democracy's fatal flaw.
The ship of state. Why Socrates believed democracy was like letting passengers navigate.
Imagine you're on a ship in the middle of storm. The waves are crashing, the wind is howling, and everyone's panicking. Now, Here's the million-dollar question Socrates would ask. Who should grab the wheel? The experienced captain who's navigated these waters 100 times, or should we take a vote among the seasick passengers? Sounds absurd when you put it that way, right? Yet this is exactly what Socrates argued we do with our governments every election day. We hand the wheel of the state to whoever wins the popularity contest, regardless of their ability to actually steer the ship. Socrates used this ship analogy to devastating effect in ancient Athens, and honestly, it hits even harder today. He argued that just as sailing requires specific knowledge, understanding winds, currents, navigation, governing requires political philosophy, understanding of justice, economic expertise, and wisdom about human nature. You wouldn't trust someone who'd never held a scalpel to perform brain surgery. So why trust someone who's never studied governance to run a nation? The democratic failure here isn't about people being stupid. It's about assuming that good intentions and common sense are enough to navigate the complex waters of statecraft. But here's where Socrates really twisted the knife. He pointed out that in democracy, the passengers not only choose the captain, but often override the captain's decisions mid-voyage. Imagine trying to navigate through a storm while 300 passengers are voting on which direction to turn the wheel every 5 minutes. That's modern democracy. Constant course corrections based on shifting public opinion, Twitter trends, and whoever screams the loudest. The ship lurches left, then right, then spins in circles, never actually getting anywhere. Meanwhile, ships run by competent captains, even if they're not the most popular, sail smoothly past, reaching their destinations while the democratic ship is still arguing about which way is north. The most damning part of Socrates' ship metaphor? He predicted that passengers would naturally choose captains who promised the smoothest sailing and the best food, not the ones who actually knew how to navigate. They'd pick the guy who swears there are no storms ahead, even when the clouds are already gathering. They'd choose comfort over competence, sweet lies over bitter truths. And when the ship inevitably starts sinking, they blame everything except their own choice to put an entertainer at the helm instead of a navigator. Which brings us to another of Socrates' brilliant insights about human nature and political philosophy.
The sweet shop versus the doctor. How democracy feeds our desires, not our needs.
Let me paint you a picture that'll change how you see every election forever. You're a parent, and your kid is sick. You can take them to two people, a doctor who'll prescribe bitter medicine and strict bed rest, or a sweet shop owner who promises candy and cartoons all day. Now, if you let your kid choose, who do you think they'll pick? Socrates used this exact analogy to explain why democracy inevitably fails. And honestly, just look around. He nailed it. In democratic systems, we don't elect leaders who tell us hard truths. We elect the ones who promise us candy. We choose the politicians who swear they can cut taxes and increase spending, who promise jobs without sacrifice, prosperity without effort. This isn't because voters are stupid. It's because we're human. Socrates understood that informed citizens are rare not because information isn't available, but because facing reality is painful. Why would you vote for someone who tells you the economy needs painful restructuring when another candidate promises magical solutions? It's like choosing between a trainer who demands 5 a.m. workouts and one who sells you a lose weight while you sleep pill. The sweet shop owner always outsells the doctor. The populist always beats the philosopher. And that's exactly why Socrates saw democracy as fundamentally flawed. We're biologically programmed to choose short-term pleasure over long-term benefit. And democracy turns this weakness into a system of government. Think about the last election you witnessed. How many candidates ran on platforms of necessary sacrifice, delayed gratification, or uncomfortable truths? Now, how many promised to solve all your problems without asking anything from you? Socrates watched this same pattern in ancient Athens. Demagogues promising easy victories in unwinnable wars, free grain without explaining where it would come from, revenge against enemies without considering consequences. The philosophical wisdom he offered was simple but brutal. Democracy doesn't select for the best leaders. It selects for the best liars. The system rewards those who tell us what we want to hear, Not what we need to hear. What's truly terrifying is that Socrates saw this creating a downward spiral. Each generation of democratic leaders has to promise more candy than the last, tell bigger lies, offer easier solutions. The doctor who speaks truth gets voted out, replaced by increasingly shameless sweet shop owners. Eventually, you end up with a society so addicted to pleasant lies that anyone speaking truth becomes the enemy. The mob rule kicks in, and suddenly, telling people they need to take their medicine makes you anti-democratic or elitist. Sound familiar? Well, Socrates learned this lesson the hard way, and the price he paid proves his point better than any argument ever could.
The tragedy of uninformed voting, when opinion defeats knowledge.
Here's a thought experiment that'll mess with your head. If you needed heart surgery, would you let everyone in the hospital vote on how to perform it? The janitor, the cafeteria staff, the visitors, everyone gets equal say in where to cut and what to remove? Sounds insane, right? Yet Socrates pointed out this is exactly what we do with decisions infinitely more complex than surgery. We let people who can't name their own senators vote on international trade agreements. We let folks who don't understand basic economics decide monetary policy. The tyranny of majority isn't just about numbers. It's about uninformed opinions crushing expertise under the weight of democratic legitimacy. You want to know what really drove Socrates crazy? It wasn't that people were ignorant. He actually loved teaching the ignorant because they knew they didn't know. What killed him, literally, was that democracy made people think their ignorance was as good as knowledge. My opinion is just as valid as yours became the battle cry, even when one person had studied the issue for decades and the other just read a headline. In ancient Athens, Socrates watched citizens vote on military strategies they couldn't understand, foreign policies they couldn't grasp, and economic plans they couldn't evaluate. The scariest part? They were absolutely confident in their decisions because, hey, they had a vote, so they must be qualified to use it, right? The voter ignorance problem isn't about intelligence. It's about time and specialization. You're smart, I'm smart, but can either of us really understand the implications of every ballot measure, every candidate's position, every constitutional amendment? Socrates argued that expecting citizens to make informed decisions on everything from war to water management was like expecting everyone to be an expert in everything. It's not just unrealistic, it's impossible. Yet democracy doesn't just allow this, it celebrates it. Every vote counts equally. Sounds noble until you realize it means the vote of someone who spent 5 minutes on Facebook counts the same as someone who spent 5 years studying the issue. But here's the kicker that Socrates understood. In a democracy, admitting you don't know something is political suicide. Politicians can't say that's outside my expertise because voters punish uncertainty and reward false confidence. So we get a system where everyone pretends to know everything, where political philosophy takes a back seat to sound bites, where critical thinking is replaced by tribal loyalty. The result? We don't get the best ideas winning. We get the simplest, most emotionally appealing ideas winning. And when someone like Socrates points this out, when someone suggests that maybe, just maybe, not all opinions are equal, well, let's just say the mob doesn't take kindly to that kind of talk.
The mob mentality. How democracy killed philosophy's greatest teacher.
You want to know the ultimate proof that Socrates was right about democracy? Democracy killed him. I'm not being metaphorical here. The democratic government of Athens, through a perfectly legal vote, sentenced philosophy's greatest teacher to death. 501 citizens sat in judgment, and by a margin of just 30 votes, they decided that asking questions was a crime worthy of death. Think about that for a second. The same system we celebrate as the pinnacle of human governance looked at someone seeking truth and wisdom and democratically decided to poison him. If that doesn't make you question mob rule, I don't know what will. The charges against Socrates were a masterclass in democratic manipulation. They accused him of corrupting the youth and impiety against the gods. Basically, thought crime dressed up in religious language. But here's what was really happening. Socrates had spent years exposing the ignorance of Athens' democratic leaders, showing how little they knew about justice, virtue, and governance. He'd embarrassed powerful people by revealing their incompetence through simple questions. In a monarchy, the king might have just exiled him. In an oligarchy, the rich would have bought him off. But in a democracy, the mob wanted blood, and the mob gets what the mob wants. What's chilling about Socrates' trial is how modern it feels. The prosecutors didn't engage with his ideas. They appealed to emotion, patriotism, and fear. They painted him as a danger to society, an elitist who thought he was better than ordinary citizens. Sound familiar? They used every trick in the democratic playbook: character assassination, appeals to tradition, us versus them rhetoric. And it worked. The wisdom versus opinion battle wasn't even close. Opinion won by a landslide. The crowd didn't want to hear that they might be wrong about anything. They wanted someone to blame for Athens' problems, and the weird old guy asking uncomfortable questions fit the bill perfectly. The real tragedy isn't just that democracy killed Socrates. It's that he saw it coming and chose to die rather than flee. He could have escaped. His friends had it all arranged. But Socrates understood that running would prove his critics right, that it would undermine everything he'd taught about justice and law. So he drank the hemlock, becoming democracy's most famous victim and its most powerful critic with the same swallow. His death proved his point more eloquently than any argument. When democratic failure meets philosophical wisdom, wisdom doesn't stand a chance. The majority doesn't want teachers, it wants cheerleaders. And speaking of teaching, that brings us to Socrates' most radical proposal for fixing democracy.
The education crisis. Why Socrates insisted voters must be philosophers.
Imagine if tomorrow a law passed saying you couldn't vote unless you could pass a basic test on what you're voting for. Not an intelligence test, not a literacy test, just proof that you understand the actual issues and candidates on the ballot. The outcry would be deafening, right? Undemocratic, elitist, voter suppression. But here's the thing. Socrates would look at our reaction and say, this is exactly why your democracy is doomed. He didn't believe in restricting voting because he hated people. He believed in it because he loved wisdom. In his mind, letting uninformed citizens vote was like letting untrained surgeons operate. It wasn't freedom, it was negligence. Socrates' vision wasn't about creating some aristocracy of genius. It was about recognizing that political education and critical thinking aren't optional extras in a democracy. They're essential requirements. Think about it. We require licenses to drive cars, certifications to cut hair, permits to sell hot dogs. Why? Because these activities can harm others if done incorrectly. But voting? Voting can literally start wars, crash economies, and destroy civilizations. Yet we hand that power to anyone who shows up. Socrates argued this wasn't expanding freedom, it was weaponizing ignorance. He believed true democracy required informed citizens, not just warm bodies in voting booths. The concept of epistocracy, rule by the knowledgeable, sounds horrifying to modern ears, but Socrates would ask us a simple question. What's more dangerous, excluding some people from voting or letting ignorance guide civilization? He wasn't advocating for IQ tests or racial barriers. He was calling for philosophical wisdom to be spread among all citizens. His dream wasn't fewer voters, but better voters, citizens who understood logic, ethics, economics, and history. He wanted every voter to be a philosopher in the truest sense, a lover of wisdom who could see past rhetoric and emotion to truth. The education crisis he identified wasn't about schools. It was about a society that valued opinion over knowledge. But here's the paradox that drove Socrates to despair. Democracy itself prevents the education it needs to survive. Politicians have no incentive to create truly informed voters because informed voters are harder to manipulate. The media profits from outrage, not enlightenment. The system rewards simple answers to complex problems, emotional reactions over careful analysis. Trying to educate voters in a democracy, Socrates realized, was like trying to clean a floor while people are actively throwing mud on it. You can't fix the system from within because the system benefits from its own brokenness. And if you think that's depressing, wait until you hear what Socrates would say about our modern democratic experiments.
The modern paradox, what Socrates would say about today's democracy.
If Socrates could see our world today, he'd probably laugh until he cried, then cry until he couldn't laugh anymore. Here we are, 2,400 years later, and we've perfected every democratic flaw he warned about. Social media has turned mob rule into an art form where the loudest, angriest voices drown out any attempt at philosophical wisdom. We've got cable news networks that would make ancient Greek demagogues jealous, turning political philosophy into entertainment and critical thinking into team sports. The tyranny of majority isn't just preserved. It's been weaponized, amplified, and monetized. We didn't fix democracy's problems. We gave them steroids and a Netflix deal. Look at our modern elections through Socrates' eyes for a second. We choose leaders based on their ability to deliver zingers in debates, not their understanding of governance. We evaluate complex economic policies through memes and sound bites. Politicians win by promising impossible things. More services with lower taxes, perfect security with perfect freedom, all the benefits of global trade with none of the disruption. The sweet shop owners don't even pretend to be doctors anymore. They just accuse the real doctors of being establishment shills. And we, the informed citizens of the 21st century, we pick our political teams like sports franchises, cheering for our side regardless of what they actually do. Socrates would recognize this immediately. It's exactly what he saw in Athens, just with better special effects. But here's where it gets really interesting. Socrates might also admit he was wrong about one thing. Despite all of democracy's failures, despite voter ignorance and mob mentality, democratic nations have somehow built the most prosperous, innovative, and free societies in human history. Maybe the chaos of democracy, the constant conflict between wisdom versus opinion, actually produces something valuable. Not perfect decisions, but adaptability. Maybe democratic failure isn't a bug, but a feature, forcing societies to muddle through and self-correct rather than following one supposedly wise leader off a cliff. Or maybe we've just been incredibly lucky, and Socrates' warnings are about to come true in spectacular fashion. The modern paradox is this. We know Socrates was right about democracy's flaws, but we can't imagine any alternative that doesn't end up worse. We're trapped in a system we know is broken, defending it, because every other option seems more broken. Socrates would probably suggest that the answer isn't to abandon democracy, but to take his criticisms seriously, to fight for better education, to resist mob mentality, to value expertise while staying humble about our own ignorance. He'd tell us that democracy without philosophical wisdom is just mob rule with extra steps, but democracy with wisdom, that might actually be something worth fighting for.
The question that changes everything.
So here's the question Socrates would ask you right now, and it's going to haunt you the next time you vote. Do you actually know what you're voting for, or are you just picking the sweet shop owner who promises you candy? Be honest with yourself. When was the last time you truly understood the implications of a policy you supported? When did you choose the bitter truth over the comfortable lie? The philosophical wisdom Socrates died for wasn't about destroying democracy. It was about saving it from itself, from us, from our tendency to choose what feels good over what is good. You want to know the real tragedy? We have access to more information than any generation in history, yet we might be the least informed voters ever. We have the tools Socrates dreamed of: instant access to knowledge, global communication, unlimited educational resources, and we use them to confirm our biases and argue with strangers. The critical thinking he died promoting is available to everyone, but we'd rather have our opinions validated than our minds changed. We've proven him right in ways he never could have imagined. Here's what you can actually do about it. Before your next vote, spend 1 hour, just 1 hour, actually researching the issues without partisan sources. Read opposing views, check primary sources, admit when you don't understand something. Question your own opinions as ruthlessly as Socrates would. Because if we don't start taking democratic participation as seriously as we take our jobs, our hobbies, or even our fantasy football leagues, then we deserve exactly the kind of leaders we get. If this video made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're thinking. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, especially someone who disagrees with you. Drop a comment with your thoughts, but here's the challenge. Can you discuss democracy's flaws without falling into partisan talking points? Can you channel Socrates and question everything, including your own beliefs? Hit subscribe and the notification bell because we're going to keep exploring these dangerous ideas that shaped our world. The establishment killed Socrates for asking questions. The least we can do is keep asking them. Remember, in a world of mob rule and sweet shop politics, thinking for yourself isn't just rebellious, it's revolutionary.